One question for every NBA team going into the 2025 NBA season. Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Buckets. If you're over on YouTube, go ahead and give us a like and subscribe to the channel. We're trying to hit 200K subscribers by the end of the year. And if you are over on Spotify, give us a follow and a 5-star review. If you want to enjoy this as an audio only experience, then that Spotify link will be in the description. This video is brought to you by MANSCAPED.com, starring the one and only Perfect Package 5.0 Ultra. This grooming kit includes the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra Groin and Body Hair Trimmer, the Crop Soother and Crop Preserver for your boys, plus 2 free gifts of Manscaped's Premium Travel Bag, the Shed 2.0, and the Boxers 2.0 featuring the Jewel Pouch. The Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra comes with 2 interchangeable skin-safe blades. First, the upgraded trimmer blade is tough on hair but gentle on your skin, and then you can go for round 2 with this foil blade, designed to leave you with a finish that's irresistibly sleek and utterly bare. Join the 10 million men worldwide who have all put their confidence in Manscaped for all things grooming and hygiene. Head over to manscaped.com and get your hands on the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra today. When you use my promo code ARB, you'll get 20% off plus free international shipping plus 2 free gifts. That's 20% off plus free shipping and 2 free gifts with promo code ARB at manscaped.com. Trust me when I say this, fellas, your balls will thank you. It's officially that time in the off season where you make a one thing for every team video. Luckily, this one is actually one of the more valid types of that format. I think what's very important for teams to determine how well they are actually going to perform going into the future is how easily can you actually answer some of the tougher questions being asked of your team. So with that said, here is one question for every NBA team. Starting over in the Western Conference, we are going to go from top to bottom. I just ordered these by the playoff seeding last year. So for the OKC Thunder, the #1 question to me is, can Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein play together effectively? Hartenstein just got a hefty paycheck, and I do believe that they didn't pay him that without the intention of playing him a lot. So the question becomes, will Chet and him play together well? Chet obviously has some limitations as a 5, given how scrawny the guy is, given that he's not the strongest rebounder in the world. Hartenstein helps in a lot of those areas. While I think defensively it should be not too much of an issue because Chet has the versatility to defend forwards pretty well, it will pull him away from the basket if you don't have an ideal matchup. Offensively speaking, I think OKC got a lot of success out of the fact that they had a 5-out option and were often running 5-out sets. Hartenstein is going to be operating around the basket or the mid-post as a playmaking hub. How much is that going to affect their spacing in a negative way? Will his playmaking dynamic, his offensive rebounding, his ability as a roller to the basket, will that overall impact in a positive way more so than that lack of spacing? We will have to see. For the Denver Nuggets, this one's a fairly obvious question. Can your young players step up and fill the void on that bench? Christian Brown's probably going to start, but after that, Peyton Watson, Julian Strawther, are those guys going to actually take some leaps and establish themselves as playoff rotation-worthy players? Or are you going into a postseason yet again where you're going to have to play fucking Justin Holiday 18 minutes per game? Not an ideal situation, so hopefully the answer to that question is yes. For the Minnesota Timberwolves, can Anthony Edwards establish himself as a top 5 NBA player? To be honest, I feel like that's the only reason that they didn't end up winning, or at least going to the NBA Finals last year. Simply the margin between him and Luka Doncic was too much to overcome, despite the fact that I think Anthony had a much better overall roster around him. So I think Ant officially being like, no doubt about it, a top 5 player in the NBA and encroaching on the Giannis, Jokic, Luka, Steph, Embiid territory in that category. If he can get into that range or anywhere near it even, I do think that is what's most important for Minnesota. There's obviously some movement on the margins that matter, some potential improvement internally, but for me, this team goes as far as Anthony Edwards goes, and the team has pretty consistently gone further and further, as Anthony Edwards has gotten better and better. So will he continue to get better, or will this team end up stagnating, and rather than actually presenting themselves as a true contender, they just end up being a really, really, really good playoff team? Not a bad position to be in, but, you know, there's hope that you can go further than that. For the Los Angeles Clippers, what the fuck is the point anymore? I don't know why you wouldn't just trade away everybody on this roster at this point. Maybe some of the creeps that they signed, like Kevin Porter and Josh Primo, could end up being actually good, impactful players, but I doubt it. And looking at the rest of this roster, it's pretty fucking bleak, man. Like, there is no reason to believe that this team could be anything better than a play-in tier team. So the fact that they have two 30-plus-year-old players towards the tail end of their careers, I feel like if I was either of them, I'd just rather be somewhere else. But James Harden really can't afford to, you know, go somewhere else at this point. Maybe he likes the idea of just the fact that he'll have more shots with Paul George gone. But one way or the other, man, I just don't like what the Clippers are doing. I think it's a waste of everybody's time, and they should blow it up. For the Dallas Mavericks, how good is Klay Thompson in a proper role? I was someone who shit on Klay Thompson a lot with Golden State, but I also recognize that a lot of that was because he was in an unideal situation. Klay Thompson is not a shot creator, and at this point in his career, he is not a second option, and he was being utilized as both of those things in Golden State. So if Klay Thompson is instead in this off-ball shooter role, this movement shooter role where he is bona fide the third option on the floor, not only the third option, but also not in a way that is so, you know, like he's not going to be taking so many more shots than PJ Washington is what I'm getting at. If he's really, really good at that, which I think he can be, that makes this one of the best signings of the offseason. For the Phoenix Suns, can Mike Budenholzer implement an actual offensive system? With the addition of Tyus Jones, the prospect of maybe bringing Bradley Beal off of the bench, I do think it is possible that Budenholzer could actually do something that resembles an offensive system in the NBA rather than just players taking turns isolating. How confident am I that that will happen? Well, first of all, Budenholzer hasn't exactly been known for the most creative offenses in the world. He's also known for being a little bit stingy about sticking with his guns. So I'm going to lean towards the answer to that's probably no. If the answer to it was yes, that's probably the most impactful change that you could conceive of with this team. For the New Orleans Pelicans, it's the same question every fucking year, but unfortunately, have to ask it again. Is Zion actually going to do this thing? Is he actually going to be reliably there? Is he going to play a ton? Is he going to be there for a postseason if they get there? Everything is predicated on whether or not they can actually answer that question with a yes. For the Los Angeles Lakers, can JJ Redick single-handedly steer this ship out of shit creek? I do believe that JJ and just simply a better coach in there, period, can make a huge difference. Darvin Ham, at first I kind of sympathized and felt like he was being scapegoated because that's just historically what happens both with the Lakers, but especially with LeBron James coaches. There were people calling for fucking Eric Spoelstra to get fired when he was on the Miami Heat. So like, clearly that shit's going to happen. I think even Tyronn Lue, for a little bit, there were some people who had some shit for him. And Tyronn Lue's one of the better coaches in the entire NBA. So that's just kind of something that comes with the territory. As time went on, I realized Darvin Ham was actually just really bad at his job, shouldn't be a head coach anywhere in the league, and JJ Redick could potentially be a really good head coach. He could also potentially be a really bad one. I don't think just because the guy can describe, you know, an elevator play to you on his YouTube channel, that means that he's necessarily going to be ready to coach LeBron James. But other than the addition of Dalton Connect, this roster is more or less the same as last year, so it's on JJ. He's really the only major change that this roster has made. So can he turn this around with his brilliant basketball brain? Or is it just going to be more of the same? For the Sacramento Kings, what is the ceiling of this offense featuring DeMar? I think the ceiling is pretty high, but I also feel like the floor is pretty low. It is difficult to discern until I actually see it in full display. The concern to me, the number one thing to watch out for is De'Aaron Fox's 3-ball real? I personally think that it is, but if it's not and he regresses as a shooter back to what he has been at earlier stages of his career, and you have him, DeMar, and Sabonis, 3 complete non-3-point threats, that would be a big problem. So his 3-ball needs to hold up. Also, they need to be sure that they're using DeMar creatively. Like, don't just do like, okay, isolate in the mid post and shoot a fucking mid-range fadeaway. He's obviously going to shoot mid-range shots. He's fucking DeMar DeRozan. That's what he does. But I'm hoping they can use him in a more dynamic, interesting way that the defense can't just rely on being the same possession after possession. But yeah, this was their big signing. They obviously are leaning into the offense by making this move. You didn't sign DeMar for defense. So how good the offense can be featuring DeMar is pretty much all that is predicated on the success of the Kings. For the Golden State Warriors, where is the shot creation coming from? I think Jonathan Kuminga can do it a little bit. Podziemski can do it a little bit. Andrew Wiggins can do it a little bit. But is there anybody on this team that you will actually be able to rely on to be a shot creator besides for Stephen Curry? Unfortunately, I think the answer is no. Maybe you could figure out a shot creation by committee type of thing if enough guys do step up, enough of their young players do step up. Simply put, I just don't think they have the offensive personnel to get that done. And if there isn't shot creation beyond Steph, I have no hope for them. You know, maybe they could make a postseason just on the virtue of Stephen Curry's dominance, but beyond that, no reason to believe this team's going to be jack or shit. For the Houston Rockets, who is staying and who is going a year or two from now? I think that question is what is looming over the heads of every player on this roster, because this team is actually really deep. They have a lot of different options at different positions. It's just a matter of who of those guys do we actually think is worth keeping around 2, 3, 4 years from now, and who of these guys are we going to be looking to move sooner rather than later? For the Utah Jazz, it's the same question I've asked for the last couple of years. While I don't necessarily dislike or hate the way that they have operated, I do feel like the question is still, what exactly is your game plan here? They just gave Lauri Markkanen a really big contract. They've had discussions about trading him, but not budged on anything that wasn't a very high value return, which I think is understandable. But I also feel like the clock is running out for that being something that makes some sense. It could very well be a situation where I just don't know if they're really going to be good enough to get a high draft pick, but also not bad enough, or sorry, not good enough to make a playoff spot, but not bad enough to get a high draft pick. And is the plan just to be in NBA purgatory for 5 years with Lauri Markkanen, or are we going to do something here? They don't need to answer that question right now, and they haven't needed to the last few years, but I feel like the need to answer that question is right around the corner. For the Memphis Grizzlies, can y'all stay healthy for once? Because I think the answer, if the answer is yes, then the sky is the limit. I think they can be a genuine, bona fide top-tier contender if they're actually healthy, but they haven't managed to be healthy pretty much since the last time they were in the postseason. For the San Antonio Spurs, do we think that a second-year leap from Victor Wembanyama is going to be enough for a playoff berth? I do think that Victor will probably end this season being pretty much a consensus top 10 player in the NBA, and that's going to be very huge for their prospects of making a postseason. However, I'm not so sure about the rest of this roster. Keldon Johnson has no playmaking ability and is not much of a defender. Devin Vassell has limited applications as a shot creator and distributor, and Chris Paul and Trey Jones are both very good at putting the ball where it needs to be and not turning it over, but they're also not the dynamic playmakers that Chris Paul used to be and that you would like to be next to Wemby. Something I always talk about on this channel is the difference, or the connection between scoring and playmaking. And because neither Trey nor especially Chris are really big scoring threats, I do worry that their playmaking might be hindered to a degree because of that reason. But is a second-year leap going to be enough to push through that, or do you really need those other guys to step up as well? For the Portland Trail Blazers, how legit is Scoot Henderson? I think this is a question that they need to answer this season, because I don't think that they can have another year where Scoot just occasionally displays a star level guard ability, because he was so bad in his rookie year that I'm not really willing to give him the same amount of time that I would have been if he was a little bit better. So you need to find out, how good is Scoot Henderson? And if the answer is not that great, then you need to adapt to that and have a new plan of attack for your rebuild. I'm not saying you ship the guy off or anything like that. I still think you keep him around to see if he can develop further and further years, but I don't think your vision should have Scoot at the center of it if he still isn't very good in his second year. All right, we're moving on to the Eastern Conference. For the Boston Celtics, I think the question that pretty much everybody will be asking is, can y'all do it again against a likely tougher Eastern Conference? I think that basically every team that could have been a threat to them last year, they managed to avoid due to injury. But not only that, but I think those rosters improved after the fact. So the New York Knicks got better. The Sixers with Paul George, the Knicks with Mikal Bridges, and the Bucks healthy with hopefully improved Damian Lillard, better adapted to the environment, and Gary Trent Jr. and some other additions that I like, Taurean Prince. They're all better teams. They're all teams that the Boston Celtics avoided last year. So if they run into one or two of those teams, will they be able to be as dominant or at least get through them as they got through the easier opponents they face in the East? People get mad when you point out the reality of not that difficult of opponents. I'm not saying this invalidates that ring because you have to play who's in front of you. That's just the way that it is. But it does lead me to wonder, can you repeat, especially given how difficult repeating in the NBA has been as of late? Can you do that when you're also actually going to face legitimate competition? Because they did not face legitimate competition. They did not face a contender for the entire time in the East. That's a luxury. I'm sorry, but it is. And I don't know if they will be able to make it through the East without that same luxury. I would still bet on them to do it. They're still my favorite coming out of the East, but I don't think they're going to be coming out completely unscathed as they did in 2024. For the New York Knicks, my biggest question is, how does Julius Randle fit into all of this? Because I honestly don't know. He can probably play some small ball 5, but I don't think that's something that I want him doing a lot. He can probably still work within the flow of that offense, although he will definitely interrupt it at points, no doubt. Would he come off of the bench? Because I feel like you want to run a lot of lineups featuring Mikal and OG. I feel like you want the shooting of DiVincenzo out there, or Josh Hart's tough-nosed, hard-nosed physicality, rebounding and all that. When I'm imagining the most ideal lineup for the Knicks, given the personnel that they currently have, Randall's not in that lineup, man. He's just not. And I don't know that his skill set fits well with the play style that the rest of this roster is going to have. For the Milwaukee Bucks, can Damian Lillard bounce back? And I think the answer to that question is predicated on two things. First, was last year's underperformance more a matter of adjusting to a new environment, a new role, a new context, or was it just simply him falling off? And then, depending on the answer to that, can the offensive system that Doc Rivers runs utilize Damian Lillard in a more effective way? I felt like Damian was very poorly utilized last year with the Bucks because he was being used in the offense as though he was the second option. Now, of course, he is the second best player on the team, but I don't know if he should be the second most utilized. The thing I've compared it to is this duo got Kobe and Shaq comparisons when they were put together, and usage-wise, Kobe eclipsed Shaq. Dribbling the ball-wise, Kobe eclipsed Shaq. Taking shots, pretty much just taking shots, he would eclipse Shaq, even though Shaq was the better player, the better scorer, the more dominant threat. He was still utilized as a guard, where Dame is being utilized as like an off-ball guy so often because Giannis wants to have the ball and create, and I just think that's a mistake. Get the ball in Damian Lillard's hands more, and hopefully he's adjusted a little bit more to this new environment, and I think that a bounce back from Dame is very plausible. For the Cleveland Cavaliers, can Evan Mobley figure it out on this roster? And I specify on this roster because I do think that Evan will figure it out. I just don't know if it's happening on a team that, while isn't a contender, is trying to feign to be a contender, is trying to pretend to be a contender anyways. And as a result, Evan really hasn't had a lot of room to make mistakes, a lot of room to explore aspects of his game that require some growing pains. Rather, he's had to stick to basic, simple offense that he knows works for the most part, and then focusing his energy on defense. But I think if the Cavaliers were a rebuilding team from the moment that they got Mobley and they stayed on that trajectory for up to this point in his career, we would probably see a more offensively skilled Evan Mobley. Unfortunately, he just hasn't had the opportunity to spread his wings, as it were, and I just don't know if he ever will figure that out on this roster. For the Philadelphia 76ers, how good are the role players around this big three? They got Caleb Martin, they brought back Kelly Oubre, who was really good for them last year. They have Kyle Lowry, who still has his moments. I do think that the team can be good and that the role players can be good, but I do think that they are a fairly top-heavy team. I think there's a pretty significant drop from Paul George to their fourth best player, and that does lead me to have some concern, because the way of the NBA landscape in recent years has been you stack your roster with excellent role players. Right now, this is 3 stars and some solid role players, and 3 stars is nice, and I do believe that Paul George has a play style that makes him the perfect third option. But nevertheless, I am concerned about the quality of their role play core. For the Indiana Pacers, how high is the ceiling for this team? I don't know if Halliburton can really be a number 1 on a title team. I feel like his scoring game is a little too limited for that, but also he's 24. You know, it's not like he's done developing. I know his age because we share the same birthday. I think the answer is probably a competitive second round exit and maybe a 50-win regular season. I do think it's worth noting that they obviously got Pascal Siakam at the trade deadline last year, and they were a better team with him, and I do think they could be a substantially better team with him throughout the entire year. Having him there for a training camp makes a difference. So how high the ceiling for them, I'm not sure, and I think this season will probably answer that question. And unfortunately for the Orlando Magic, I have the same exact question. How high is the ceiling? I don't think this will be answered as quickly as it will with the Pacers, because Paolo's only really had 1 year to be really excellent, and he's probably going to improve even more from there, more so than Tyrese is probably going to improve. Not to mention, they didn't have some big offseason acquisition. So I don't think the answer to this question will actually be answered this year, but I do think the start to the answer to the question will happen this year, I guess. We will get a better idea of the ceiling of this team after we're done with year 2 of them being a playoff contender. For the Miami Heat, is this team heading towards a rebuild, or are we still holding on? Lots of drama with Jimmy Butler and Pat Riley this offseason. Lots of comments suggesting that Pat's kind of tired of Jimmy Butler's "I'm only trying during the playoffs" shtick. I am right there with you, buddy, because I'm also fucking tired of it, and I actually have grown to find it to be an ineffective play style, even if I respected the idea initially. But the reality is, I don't think that they're going to head into any postseason with strong momentum because of that mentality from Jimmy. He's getting older. I think he wants to win a ring before his career is done, so I wouldn't be surprised if come trade deadline there is some discussion about Jimmy Butler going elsewhere. Also, a really huge summer for Bam Adebayo. A lot of people got really high on him after the USA stuff, so I do think that the Miami Heat could be like, all right, maybe we just need to build around Bam and see how that goes, rather than, you know, putting all of our eggs in this Jimmy Butler basket that doesn't want to show up for most of the year. Whether or not they still hold on or go to a rebuild, it could be outside of their own hands, whether that be Jimmy's own desires or just outright decline across the board. You know, I think Bam can get better. I think that Jaime Jaquez can get better. I think that Nikola Jovic can get better. Outside of that, I think you're mostly going to see the same team. There are a couple of things that can swing positively for Miami. So, yeah. Are we still holding on? Is there actually some hope, possibly, for things to be better than just holding on? Or are they going to accept their fate sooner rather than later? For the Chicago Bulls, my only question is, y'all aren't going to bullshit your way into 35 wins, right? I want a legitimate tanking season. I don't want more than 25 wins. And back when the Chicago Bulls were tanking, they would always win like 30, 32 games, and it would piss me off every time. Got the 7th pick every goddamn time. We're never one of the teams actually top of the lottery odds. So I do hope that they don't intend on being competitive in any capacity. We heard discussions when they traded for Josh Giddey that they were hoping to be competitive. I am just praying that that's not true. For the Atlanta Hawks, is this team's ceiling much higher now that DeJounte Murray is gone? I almost said Jamal Murray. I feel like the answer to that question is yes. But if it's not, then it's probably trade Trey time. If the answer to that's no, it's probably done. You're probably just going to have to start from scratch at that point. For the Brooklyn Nets, what can you get from trading your role players? Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith. Maybe you don't view Nick Claxton as a long-term piece. He's not old, but he's also not crazy young by any means. So that's basically the only thing of interest with them. There's probably going to be a team next year that trades for Cam Johnson, and he actually makes a big impact for them, but it's not going to be with the fucking Nets. For the Toronto Raptors, what I'm most interested in is what does the RJ Barrett / Scotty Barnes fit look like over a full season? They obviously played like 30-something games together, and it was fine, but that was also with both of them having career years from outside, and I am curious if those jump shots are legitimate, and if they're not, I think it could start to get ugly. For the Charlotte Hornets, can LaMelo Ball play more than 35 games? Their season entirely hinges on that, otherwise it's just another year of being bad. For the Washington Wizards, how much of a project is Bilal Coulibaly's offense? He's obviously shown a ton of upside as a defender, and he's not a zero offensively, but there's a lot of room to grow there, and I think how much of a project that aspect of his game ends up proving to be this year will determine how much of a cornerstone he can end up being going forward. And for the Detroit Pistons, last and probably least, how good will Cade Cunningham prove to be with more spacing? I think Cade has had a very unfair shake to this point in his career, and a well-spaced offense could end up making a huge difference and allow for him to have a breakout season, probably even first-time All-Star level. Those are my questions for every NBA team. Let me know what you think the answer might be, or if there's maybe a bigger question to ask for some of these teams. But that is it. Shout out to Nick for editing this video. Shout out to you for watching it, and goodbye.